Thanks for joining everyone so far. I'm going to get started in just another 10 or 15 seconds here. Just see some last few people logging in. But welcome to our webinar brought to you by CodeFresh Live. Today we are presenting combining progressive delivery with GitOps and continuous delivery. And in this webinar, Victor is going to go over what he sees as the three phrases that most people are talking about when it comes to modern workflow and techniques. And that is continuous delivery, GitOps, and progressive delivery. And how the real benefit is kind of combining all of these. And he's going to show you how he does that. But first, let's do a couple housekeeping notes. We encourage your questions throughout the session, but please remember to submit them using the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar rather than in the chat. That way we can just keep better track of them. We don't want to miss your question in the chat stream. This session is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you by tomorrow from me, Taryn at CodeFresh. So please look out for that and check your spam folder. Lastly, please remember to reference codefresh.io/events for upcoming webinars, as we have fresh and informative webinars for you several times a month, including another one from Victor later this month. So with that, I'll go ahead and bring Victor online and we can get started with the webinar. Hi, Victor.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening and all that stuff. So maybe you should stop. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk about progressive delivery, GitOps, continuous delivery, try to combine it together. And there are quite a few reasons to do each of those practices separately. There are a few reasons why we want to combine them all together, because when we do combine those practices, we get something potentially really awesome, something that we really, really need. So let me start with some sort of requirements. What do I expect from processes like that? Or what do I expect from my live system to be able to do and how we should do that? And the first rule that I have is that people should not be involved in the processes other than writing code. And by code, I mean tests, code of your application, YAML, even YAML, we can consider it code, right? We write code, and then we have some processes that are happening with our applications, with that code. And I don't want to see anybody involved in that part for a couple of reasons. First, because people, you're unreliable. I cannot assume that you will be doing the same thing over and over again. And processes are all about repetition. It's all about doing the same thing over and over again. Build something, test something, deploy something, and so on and so forth. So repeatable processes need to be reliable. People are not reliable. Hence, we want to automate all those things. Apart from the fact that it's a waste of human talent to do repetitive things over and over again. And how do we automate our processes? Generally speaking, we do them through some sort of pipelines, right? We call them continuous integration pipeline in the past. Now we call them continuous delivery or continuous deployment pipelines. But there are some pipelines that we use. Actually, the format of the pipeline is what we use to define some steps that should be executed whenever we do something with our code, like push it to Git repository. So that was number one. Number two is that I believe that absolutely everything should be traceable. And the best way to trace things is to store them in Git, right? This is my code. These are my tests. Those are my manifests for deployments. This is my infrastructure defined again as code. Everything is defined as code. Everything needs to be traceable. So let's put it in Git. We can see the revisions. We can see the history of those things. We can review them. We can make pull requests. We can do all the things that we do. And if we are storing everything in Git, then we are introducing the second practice, which would be GitOps. Basically, we are operating stuff by pushing changes to Git. The third thing that I think is very important is that nobody has access to the cluster. There is no good reason today to have access to clusters, especially to production, except in case of some emergency, something terrible happened. Now, when I was young, when somebody would tell me, hey, nobody has access to the cluster, I did have experience of that, meaning that I would need to wait for days until something happens. I have no access to the cluster, therefore I need to open 17 Jira tickets and wait for 3 weeks until somebody responds, and so on and so forth, right? So, but today's situation is different. We can be just as efficient or more efficient than we were before without ever accessing live clusters, especially production. And we can accomplish that not having access by having pipelines and by applying GitOps principles, meaning everything in Git, some processes are executed when we change those things in Git. What else? I want everything to be secure. There are many ways how we can secure things, but in the context of continuous delivery, continuous deployment, GitOps, and what's not, we generally want to scan things before applying them, right? We want to make sure that whatever we are about to do, whatever processes are about to do is safe by scanning that from security vulnerabilities, coding practices, what's not. Many different things we can scan. And then we want to, if everything is automated, including deployments everywhere, including production, then we want also to reduce the blast radius. So if something goes wrong, I don't want that to go wrong for everybody, all the users that I have. How about affecting 5% of the users and then discovering that there is something terribly wrong and then fixing it, instead of affecting 100% of the users and then figuring out what to do next. And in that context, we can introduce a third practice, which is progressive delivery. Could be canary deployments, could be blue-green, could be rolling updates, could be many different things. Today, I will use canary deployments. And if you want a discussion, please let me know, because I have, for example, very negative opinion about blue-green deployment. I think it's silly, and everybody freaks out when I say that. But anyways, I'm jumping from one subject to another. And finally, if things go wrong, with the idea of reducing the blast radius and making it safe and having zero downtime deployments, we want to be able to automatically roll back when that is applicable. Sometimes we don't want to roll back, but sometimes we do. Depends really on the context. So 3 practices: continuous delivery, through continuous delivery pipelines to automate all the steps. Then we have GitOps as a way to basically operate everything by pushing changes to Git. And finally, progressive delivery as a way to progressively increase the reach of our releases as we are iteratively, as we are getting more and more confidence that those releases are working as expected. So 3 practices, and I'm going to try to combine them all. Now, before I move on, let me share my screen. We can, that's not the screen I want to share. This is the screen I'm going to share. So what I have here, I don't have much. I mean, I have a cluster. I have a Kubernetes cluster here. Let me show you that. kubectl get, I don't know, nodes, right? I have a Kubernetes cluster, and I installed a couple of tools. I installed Argo CD, which will help me do progressive delivery. What else did I install? I installed Prometheus, where I will be storing metrics so that did I say Argo CD? I have Argo CD to do the GitOps part of deployments. I have Argo rollouts that will help me do progressive delivery. I have Prometheus, where I store my metrics so that Argo rollouts can make a better decision how to roll forward or roll back. And I'm using CodeFresh for pipelines, which is the only thing not running in my cluster because it's a SaaS service. It could be running in your cluster. You could have agents in your cluster depending on the setup, but I went with fully SaaS. So I will be running my pipelines as CodeFresh pipelines in cloud over there, right? So that's what I have. And now let me show you a few things. First of all, cat Helm. Where am I now? Am I in the right directory? I'm not in the right directory. This is unacceptable. Here, now I'm in the right directory. Okay. Now I have this definition: templates, rollout YAML. This defines my application or part of my application. It has a service that has deployment and what's not. The thing that really matters here in this context is, where is it? Is here. I'll find it. Rollout. Basically, I'm defining my application through Argo rollouts, which will create all the logic I need for progressive delivery. And that one will, don't be scared of YAML, will basically monitor my deployments by using two separate queries from Prometheus. Here you go. It will actually measure the error rate of my applications by by summing all the 200 responses and dividing them with the rate of all the responses, so that I get what's the success rate or what's error rate, depending on how you look at it. And I'm measuring average request duration during my deployments. Again, a very relatively simple query that takes, what does it do here? Let me see. Yeah, it measures the rate of duration of, sum of all the response times and divides it with the number of count of responses to get an average rate of response time. So it's a simple example. This is not everything you would need for production, but it's good enough to demonstrate what I'm trying to do. And what I'm trying to do is have to measure the error rate and response times and say that in a simplistic point of view, that will give me confidence whether to continue releasing my new releases, new application or no. Okay, and I already deployed the first release of my application. I will show you later how I did that. But if I look at it, Argo rollouts, namespace production, and what else? Get rollout, DevOps toolkit, DevOps toolkit. Don't ask me why it's such a silly name. You can see that the first release is already deployed. It is up and running, and 100% of the requests are going to that release. So if this would be a real setup, all my users are experiencing, are using this specific release of my application. That will change in a few moments. Actually, let me change it right away, right? Let's imagine that now I'm writing code. I'm not going to write any code today. That would be boring. I mean, actually, writing code is not boring. That would be awesome, but I don't have enough time for that. So I'm going to simulate that I'm writing changing the code of my application, implementing new feature by changing a README. I don't know, what am I gonna do? Will this work? Right, I'm just making a random change in my source code just so that there is something to be released. Simulation, right? And I'm going to add that to the repo. I'm going to commit it. Will it work? And I'm going to push that to my Git repository, right? I'm doing simulation of what everybody does, right? I mean, every developer, you write some code, you develop a new feature, what's or not, you push it to Git. Absolutely everybody does that today. And here, I first want to show you what happens when there is something goes wrong. And to simulate what happens when something goes wrong, I will be simulating errors in my application by sending wrong requests to it intentionally, simply because this application, this demo app doesn't have bugs. So I cannot really, I have to simulate it. I mean, it's a joke, it does, of course. But I'm simulating as if there is something going wrong and the application is responding with 404, not found, doesn't matter, some kind of error, and see what will happen. What will happen with my processes and what's or not when that is going on. And since I push something to Git, this is what happened really. In this case, CodeFresh detected that I pushed something and it is executing a pipeline. This pipeline is simple. I'm not going now into depth of complicated stuff. but it might contain some things that you might not be doing today. So the simple part is on the left. Actually, both parts are simple, but common part is on the left. And that means that I'm cloning a repository. I'm building my application. This is simple Hugo app. I'm building a container image and pushing it to my registry. And here, the step that is currently executing, I'm using Snyk today to scan the image and confirm that it doesn't have anything it shouldn't be having, right? And that finished. And now I'm doing things that you might not be doing. Now, before I explain what is happening on the right side, remember what I said before. I don't have access to my cluster. I mean, I do, but imagine that I don't. You cannot have access to my cluster. And I'm even not allowing CodeFresh to have access to my cluster. It's a closed system. I don't have access to the cluster. The tools I'm using are not having access to the cluster. Nobody outside of the cluster has access to the cluster. So the way for me to deploy a new release was to clone a repository that contains the full definition of my production. That's this step here. And then I'm changing the contents of that repository by making changes that says, hey, Victor wants to deploy release 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I push that change back to the repo, to the branch of the repo, and created a pull request. So far, nothing happened to the cluster. The only thing that happened after I pushed some changes to Git is that my container image was built, it was scanned, and I got some pull requests. Now let me take a look at that pull request and see. No, that's a wrong one again. Let's see that pull request. Where do I have it? Where do I have it? What did I use? Yes, github.com, Argo CD production. So this is the repository that defines my production cluster. Everything I have in my cluster is in this repository. And there is a new pull request over here, which was created by the pipeline. And if I look at the pull request, I can say, hey, somebody wants to make a change to production. Think of it as continuous delivery, not continuous deployment. So there is a manual confirmation that I want to deploy something new or to change the state of the actual state of my cluster. So I can now start writing comments. I can ask for clarifications. I can review the changes to the code. This is formatting now. Actually, the changes are much smaller. I can do whatever I need to do to gain confidence that I want this newly built release to be deployed to production. And once I'm confident, once I did the review, once I did my testing, once I did everything I need to do, I'm going to merge this pull request. Actually, I'm going to do it right away. And remember, I'm still not touching the cluster. I'm not changing the state of the cluster. I don't have access to the cluster. All I'm doing is making a pull request, actually merging the pull request. Now, once I merge that pull request, and okay, again, wrong screen. What's happening with you, Victor? Once I merge that pull request, Argo CD that is already running in my cluster is monitoring this Git repository, and it detected changes, and I should actually be able to see those changes. Let me open for you HTTP, the address should be Argo. What is the address? I forgot the address that I used. Okay, I need to discover it. kubectl get img-a. Where is my Argo running? Come on, come on, come on. Here is my Argo, right? So if I open it, you can see this is my cluster. And this is the application that I just decided to upgrade. Now, in the parallel, while I'm doing that, Argo rollouts is doing progressive delivery. And we can see that by executing the same command I showed you before here and seeing what's happening. And what is happening is that it is already running for 48 seconds, a new release. but it is not running. Let me make this slightly smaller. It is not being visible to all the users. It is being visible only to a fraction of my users, to 10%. So right now, 10% of my users are seeing this new release. This is the reduced radius. And soon, Argo rollouts will start fetching metrics from Prometheus and start evaluating whether it should continue, increase the reach, maybe from 10 to 30% or something like that, or it should roll back. Now remember, I'm faking that there is a problem with the application by sending requests that respond with 404. So it should soon discover that. Here we are. It takes 2 minutes to collect metrics. And then we should be, how do I watch this? Once
Victor,
you see
during those sorry, I was going to say during those couple minutes,
go ahead.
I do have a question for you. I know you don't mind being interrupted by questions. Is this a good time?
Bring it on.
Victor,
bring it on.
Victor loves questions. Please ask more questions.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question from Jordan. Is the production environment literally everything, or can it be broken up by something like business domain? He says, my concern is that everything is in one big repository. Then you could have hundreds of pull requests per day.
No, it can be broken into, it can be one repository, 1,000 repositories. Argo doesn't really care. Let me actually answer that by showing you here. So if I go back to Argo and let me make this bigger, you will see now that this Prometheus is being fetched from github.com Prometheus community. And this production is being defined in this repository and Argo rollouts here. So in this case, I have one central repository. This is production that handles everything. And then that one branches into different repositories. But I could have broken it into namespaces and say, hey, this repository is for this namespace, that repository is for that namespace. Or any other way. You can have as many repositories that are involved in creating the desired state of, let's say, production as you want. It really depends from use case, but you can do that. That's absolutely not a problem. I often forget the question, so I'm not sure whether I answered it. If not, let me know in the comments and interrupt me. Keep interrupting. This is cool, actually. And while you're figuring out, yes. No?
And Jordan said, yes, thank you. You did answer his question.
So while I was answering the question, and keep them coming, what happened here, you see that my application scaled down. The new release scaled down. So what happened is that Argo rollouts, when while it was redirecting 10% of the incoming traffic to the new release and 90 to the old, discovered that there is something wrong. And it discovered that by querying metrics, in this case from Prometheus, it could be from other sources. And you can see that by having here 5 were okay, 5 iterations of a query, of a metric or expression was okay, and 5 was not. That's because I'm using 2 queries in this case. Normally I would have many more. One of them, response time was okay, and the other one, that is the percentage of successful requests, was not. And that's normal because I'm receiving 404 right now. So it detected that there's something wrong and it rolled back. And during that time, only 10% of my users were affected. Now, percentage can be changed. It could be 1%, 30%, doesn't matter, right? You can configure that. So reduce blast radius, figuring out what's wrong, that there is something wrong, rolling back, and all of that without me doing anything. I haven't done anything except push a change to my Git repository and approving the deployment to production by merging a pull request that was created for me automatically. Now, cool. So that's a negative scenario. That's what happens when there is something terribly wrong. Now let's see what happens when there is something that is not wrong. And we are going to do that by making, what am I going to do? I forgot already what am I going to do. Yes, let's make another change to the code and simulate Now imagine that I fix this. Let's see, this silly text is me fixing the problem, right? Imagine that I worked, found the bug, fixed it, I made changes to the code, and I'm going to push those changes to Git repo again. This is a repository of the application itself. It could be any. This should fix it, right? And I'm going to push that to the Git repo. And while that is happening, let me simulate as if everything is fine with the application by slightly changing the loop, the stream of requests that I'm simulating as if it's users. And now I'm kind of simulating that everything is okay. You see that I'm getting 200 response codes from my app. Now, if I go back to CodeFresh, I should have a new build because it is monitoring the repository of my application. Where is the new build? Come on, here is the new build with all the same steps, right? It is cloning the repository of the application. Let's see. It is cloning the repository of the application. It built the binaries. Now you need to have imagination for this. This could be anything, right? Normally I would run tests, I would run unit tests, I would then deploy to staging, I would run some other integration tests, let's say, and so on and so forth. I'm simplifying it for you more so that you understand the process rather than all the steps that you need to have. Anyways, I built a new container image. It's not CodeFresh in this case, pushed it to container registry. I think I'm using Docker Hub today, but again, doesn't matter. It could be any container registry. Scanning for vulnerabilities, and then comes the deployment part. Come on, this is so slow. Let me see the logs. What's going on here? Output. Yeah, I increased the resolution of the screen so that I don't see the logs. Here we are. Yeah, Sneak is still scanning my image. This is a good time for questions.
I was going to say, I do have some questions, actually. Marius asks, let's say merge it PR with the changes, and will Argo roll back the changes in Git? Or what's happening with the changes we did before? Did you get that?
Great question. And this is you just stumbled upon one of the problems that we are having. And that is that there is a discrepancy between GitOps approach, meaning everything defined in Git, and there is actually a missing bridge between GitOps approach and then dynamic nature of our clusters. Like rollouts is not really, Argo rollouts is not really GitOps focused. It is changing the state of the cluster dynamically from inside of the cluster. And that's a kind of a problem. And actually, that's one of the issues that right now I'm talking to you, but in generally speaking, at this moment, we are working on solving, and that is that the processes inside of the cluster, like, autoscalers, progressive delivery, what's or not, report back to some agent, let's say Argo CD or something like that, the changes of the status that would report it back to Git. So in other words, in this context, in this demo, the whole GitOps story works, except in the case of rollbacks. And that's one of the missing pieces that are still there, right? And this is actually, there are many other missing pieces. Basically, the whole idea is that all the tools should get used to work against Git one way or another. Some are better at that than others. We're getting there, let's say. That was the honest answer.
Marius has kind of a follow-up question, and he says, and do we have changes in Git if Argo rolls back the changes in Git repo?
So Argo doesn't, depends which Argo. There are many Argos. Argo CD is doing the GitOps part of deployments, monitoring Git repositories. It's not changing Git in any form or way. Pipelines are changing it. So this pipeline, which is CodeFresh in this case, is making pull requests and what's or not. Now, what I could do as alternative to all that, if something changes in my cluster without me wanting, without that being reflected in Git, like progressive delivery, but that will be solved in a few months' time. Anyway, I always have alternative option in going directly to Git and saying, hey, this is the Git repository defines my production. I want to roll back. Let's say that I want to roll back. Let me find an example. This application, that was Paradox, whatever it is. Alternative to being rolled back automatically is that I could go here and say, hey, this definition of this application should, let's say that right now it is being running version 1.1.1.0. I could roll it back by saying, hey, no, I want to go back to 1.0.0 or whatever version it is. If I would commit this file, if I would make those changes as an intention to roll back manually, then pushing that change would result in the same effect as changing the state of the cluster, rolling back, right? Argo CD would pick it up, and then it would go back to where it was. Now, what we are missing is Argo rollouts, the one that does progressive delivery, not only to change the state, but also to make this change, the similar change to what I did to this file manually. That's a missing piece. And you stumbled upon one of the big problems. And this is, by the way, not the problem specific to Argo. If you're using, for example, Flagger, which is alternative to Argo rollouts, that also does progressive delivery, it has exactly the same problem. So rolling back is still unsolved, I would say, from industry perspective, from tooling perspective, not from the process perspective.
And we have one more question, Victor, if I can interject. For container security, is there any tool or framework used, or is this done within CodeFresh?
No, so
I think you were using Sneaker.
Yeah, I'm using Sneak. So in this concept, we are working on some stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about yet. But from security perspective, we're making sure that CodeFresh itself is extremely secure, which is a long topic, which we can discuss if we have time later. And then that it integrates seamlessly, transparently in a way with all the other tools that you might need involved. Like right now, I'm using Sneak inside of my pipelines to validate whether the code inside of containers as well, and base images are correct. I could have used Sneak for Terraform or what's not, or I could have used, there are quite a few other tools with which we integrate, but we do not provide from security perspective our own features. We are making sure that we integrate with best of breed tools that are doing that very well, and that we ourselves are extremely secure. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Sounds good. That's all the questions for now.
Okay. Keep interrupting. This is really cool. So the pipeline created a new pull request. I can review the pull request, and you can see that basically this is what was supposed to be there, but it's not because it rolled back. But that's the last definition of what I have. And now that I fixed the problem, I'm rolling forward. I fixed the problem by pushing something to Git repository that executes a pipeline that does a bunch of stuff, and among other things creates this pull request. And this pull request says, hey, Victor wants to run this specific application based on this tag now. Validate it, review it, do whatever you need to do, and when you're finished, merge the pull request, confirm merge. And now you will see that Argo will soon, you see synchronization, okay, I don't know if you can see this. Last time it succeeded 15 minutes ago, and now it started again synchronizing. And here you go, you can see the rollout is happening. Argo roll CD synchronize what is my Git repo with the cluster, and that means Argo rollouts definition. Now Argo rollouts is doing progressive delivery, and we can take a look at that. Let me see. by watching it again like before. So here you see, this is, if I go from bottom up, this is the first release that was successful. This was the second release that was rolled back. And now we're having a third release that we don't know yet whether it's a good one or not. It will need to wait for 2 minutes. And the reason for 2 minutes is because my Prometheus is configured to scrape metrics to pull metrics every 2 minutes. So I want to make sure that there are metrics to query, that they're not from before. So 2 minutes later, it will start querying metrics again. And remember, now I'm sending a stream of good requests, so it should be okay. And what you will see, actually what you see right now is that 10% of my users are seeing this new release. 0% of the users are seeing the one that was failed, that rolled back. And 90% of my users are seeing the first one, the last good one I had in a cluster. So after a few seconds, after 2 minutes, which is 20-something minutes from now, it should increase the weight, I believe, to 30%. I'm not sure what I put. We'll find out soon and start evaluating metrics. So questions, or watch it in silence for like 10 seconds. That's the maximum I can be silent.
I did have a follow-up question I missed just in our Q&A session earlier. He was asked, after he was asking about whether you could security was included in your pipeline. He also asked, can CodeFresh be integrated with Harbor? I haven't heard of Harbor, but can you, I don't know if you have.
Harbor, yes. We do have integration, but I must now, it will sound silly. I haven't used it in a while myself, so I would need to double check what exactly we do with Harbor. I know that there is integration. I'm too old. My memory doesn't serve me more than a month in a past. So if I use something a long time ago, I forget. So the answer is yes, but I don't know the details.
All right, any more questions? Going once? Let me check our YouTube here. Nope, going twice. All right, continue, Victor.
You can see that it is increasing now, the weight, gradually. Now 50% of my users are seeing the new release. And now, right now, 2-3 seconds ago, it changed to 100%. And the reason why I did that is because it created 14 validations, or it queried Prometheus 14 times. All 14 were successful. Now, the number really depends on the duration I want to have of progressive delivery. I made it short intentionally so that you don't wait for long. Anyways, all the queries returned values that were below the thresholds or above, depending on the type of the threshold. It's successful. It thinks that this is awesome. And now 100% of users, from nothing to 100% over time, iteratively reach 100%. And now everybody sees a new release as they should be. And I can confirm all that if I open the app. Let me see, kubectl get ingress. I don't remember the address. Where are you? No, it's using Istio, I think. Yeah, this should be the. Let me open the application to confirm that it really works. HTTP DevOps. I think that this is the pattern I put. And then Istio host. I'm trying to remember the address I used. I think it was this one. Here you go. That's the application. That's the release. Whatever is there. It's a silly demo application, nothing really serious. But the point is that, hey, there it is. It's running. 100% of my users now see that. I had a period of time during which part of my users were seeing the old release and part of them were seeing the new one. And now everybody sees the new stuff. And that was the very quick introduction, I mean, to all the stuff combined together. And you know, I have a problem, and that problem is that I usually create a lot of material and then I do only half of my presentation in allocated time. And this time I went to other extreme. I finished earlier than I usually do, partly because also I tend to speak fast and what's not. So that's the demo, that's the talk. Any question you can imagine, if you have any, I'm going to answer. Except what's the weather outside, because it's horribly cold. I don't want to talk about that.
We do have another question, and that is, are companies using Argo rollouts in production if there is no way to roll back automatically based on Prometheus inputs?
No, there is definitely. Argo rollouts rolls back automatically based on Prometheus inputs. That's what I did in the demo. That's the first new release that I did that failed. It rolls back automatically. The problem that I was mentioning, if I understood your question, is that when it rolls back, it does not reflect that change to Git. So there is that discrepancy between Argo rollouts and Argo CD. Now, all that discrepancy is handled soon afterwards. When I make a new release, when I make a fix, then eventually it will, the desired state, the Git, and the actual state will become exactly the same. But when you roll back, then you have that discrepancy between Git and the actual state, and that's kind of problematic. We are working on it, but it's not there yet. And I think that as far as my knowledge works, none of the progressive delivery tools yet are capable of synchronizing with Git after the rollback. But I also know that quite a few different tools are working on exactly the same problem.
So follow-up question to that, he asked, so how do companies handle it in production?
It's not such a big deal. I mean, so you do rollback. So rollback is not a problem. It's more that it is not reflected in Git. So there is a discrepancy there. And usually assuming that, so it really depends, to be honest, on the speed with which you're working. Now, if when you roll back, I would guess that when you roll back, you're working on a fix. You're going to deploy a fix to the problem that caused the release to roll back in the first place, and it will be up and running with the changes applied to Git relatively fast, maybe an hour later, half an hour, 15 minutes, right? Now, if you're talking about having a longer cycle that you cannot really release fixes and what's not right away, then you might need, and this is only in case of a rollback. Only in case of a rollback, you might need to change the state in Git manually if it takes you, like, I don't know, a full day or days or a week to fix the problem in the first place.
All right, I'm going to head over to the chat for our next question. Can Argo use Helm's release feature to roll back?
Helm can, yes, Helm can, but Helm alone actually cannot, because of two things. First of all, Helm is not doing any type of analysis. Helm is just a way how to create templates that describe your manifest, your application. So it's not really doing rollbacks by itself, by evaluating metrics and queries and what's not, right? At least not that I know. Maybe there is some plugin that I don't know, but basically no, that's what Argo Rollouts does. And Argo Rollouts relies on Helm or Customize or whatever to do the job. So think of it as two separate things. Helm, just as Customize, just as JSON8, is more about defining what your application is, while tools like Argo Rollouts, Flagger, for example, and a few others are about creating that process that dynamically, basically, in the essence, what those processes all do is very similar, and that's deploy a second release in parallel with the first, and then manipulate load balancers, virtual services, whatever you're using, to send portion of the traffic to the new release and then another portion to the old. So that's the most important part of it, manipulating traffic. And in parallel with that, monitoring some metrics storage, querying it, and deciding to roll back. Now, Argo rollouts or Flagger and those tools, they can use Helm rollback feature to do the actual rollback, but they are the entities that initiate the process. And now whether the process goes through Helm rollback feature or, as I hope soon, by modifying the definitions in Git or some other way, that's a separate process, let's say. Those tools are progressive delivery tools are triggers of rollback that is handled by somebody else or something else.
All right, I have more questions rolling in. Let's see, from Gonzalo, is Argo built on top of Istio? Can we use other service meshes?
So Argo is not built really on top of Istio, rather that Argo uses Istio to do a few things, but most important is that managing the traffic. I'm using Istio today. Argo rollouts, and I don't remember the exact list, but it can use Istio, it can use Linkerd, or basically any SMI, service mesh interface implementation. It can use without service mesh like Nginx, and there are others. I think that there are, like, last time I checked, 5, 6, 7 different implementations for traffic splitting, and Istio being only one of them, the one that I'm using today. But basically, it works with almost all popular ways to manage traffic inside of your Kubernetes clusters.
All right, and our next question, I'm going to head over to the chat for Tracy. Can Argo rollouts be used only within CodeFresh-based environments, or can it be used with GitLab, CI/CD, or Bitbucket as well?
Yes, it's a process that, so you need to install. So let's say that there are 3 things, maybe more. We'll see during this monologue how many I'm going to come up. Right? There is a Argo rollouts controller itself. That one is running in your cluster and monitoring, waiting for you to deploy Argo manifest YAML to your cluster. Right? Doesn't matter how you get that manifest there. It's just sitting there monitoring Kubernetes API and waiting for rollouts kind to be kind of a resource, Kubernetes resource, to be applied. So yes, you can run it as long as you have Kubernetes. Doesn't matter what else you have, you can run Argo rollouts. Now, on top of that, you need to figure out, hey, how are you going to tell Kubernetes that you want to make a modification to rollout resource, to apply a different YAML, and that's where I'm using Argo CD that monitors Git repository and says, hey, somebody changed something in Git, let me apply this to Kubernetes. And when that something is related to Argo rollouts does the process. And I'm now reverse engineering, doing the process the other way around. And then you need something that will, build your stuff and run tests and ultimately change that Git definition. And for that, I'm using CodeFresh. It could be some other pipeline. It could be some other process. You should be using CodeFresh. But if you're not, it could be something else.
Perfect. Tracy said, thank you. I have one more question left. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll before we end, and please feel free to fill in more or ask more questions. We have more time. So get those questions in the Q&A. Thank you for your feedback. This is really going to help us in kind of crafting our next webinars, and let us know if you want to try CodeFresh. All right, so right now our last question is, in case of a rollback from Argo rollouts, do we have to then disable autosync in Argo CD so that we don't risk it getting deployed again?
It's kind of problem that is still unsolved, and this is kind of on community level. But disabling autosync would not solve the problem, because if you sync automatically, you sync by clicking a button. If you try to resync the same thing again without making a fix instead, it would fail, right? So now, I personally, so the problem is the same. If you make a change or you click a button, that might cause a problem. Now, I don't see a need for manual syncing in Argo CD for a simple reason, because if you want manually to sync, then create a pull request. So keep Argo rollout, Argo CD as auto sync. And if you want it to be truly auto sync, then push to master. If you want manual confirmation, which is equivalent of manual syncing Argo CD, still keep it on auto sync and then create a pull request like what I did, right? It's equivalent. And yes, you would need to be a bit careful when it rolls back, not to sync the same thing. Now, there would not be a big damage, even if you make a mistake through auto sync, manual sync, whatever, because that's what Argo rollouts is doing. It would be better if you don't, but if you make a mistake and resync again to the faulty release, the job of Argo CD is to make sure that the blast radius is small, not many people see it, and it would roll back again.
All right, that's all the questions we have for now. So I'm just going to share my end slide here and thank Victor so much for his presentation. Thank you all for your wonderful questions and your answers to the poll. If you haven't, I see that some of you are already CodeFresh users, but if you're not yet, remember that we have a free forever account with unlimited builds. So make sure and go check that out at codefresh.io. We also have lots of great upcoming content for you, like this webinar. So go to codefresh.io/events and you can see all of our upcoming webinars as well. So that's all for today. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Victor. Have a great one.
Thank you.